Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Business Success Series presented by Manulife, promoting workplace mental health in challenging times. My name is Ian McLean. I'm the President and CEO of the Greater Kitchener-Waterloo Chamber of Commerce. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we do live and work on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples, as we seek a renewed relationship based on a foundation of mutual understanding and respect. As participants in today's virtual event, we are coming together as one. We believe everyone is free to be their true self and receive the same respect and opportunity, regardless of age, ethnicity, gender, culture, identity, sexual orientation, beliefs, or language. We hope you will join us in fostering a positive environment here today that is a safe and welcoming space for all. We know there is more that we can do, and we are committed to listening, learning, and growing as we go. Today's session would not be possible without the continued support of our partners and sponsors. So a special thank you today to the title sponsor of the Business Success Series, Manulife, our Platinum Series sponsor for the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, and for February's monthly sponsor, KPMG. These organizations are committed to supporting our local economy and providing businesses with the resources and tools they need to thrive. Just before the session starts, I'd like to go over a few quick reminders. Please ensure that your microphone is muted throughout the presentation so we can reduce any background noise. If you have a tech-related question, please comment in the chat section, and a representative of our team will get back to you momentarily. If you have a question for today's speaker, they'll be gathered throughout the session, and our speakers will do their best to answer as many questions as possible throughout the presentation. All attendees will be sent a recording of today's presentation, and it will also be made available on the Greater KW Chamber website. I'd like to now invite Denis Trottier, Chief Mental Officer with KPMG, to introduce today's guests. Denis.
Thank you, Ian. KPMG is proud to be this month's presenting sponsor of your Business Success Series. Before I introduce today's guest, many of you are likely wondering what my role is as a Chief Mental Health Officer. Simple. I own one lens for KPMG, and that's the mental health lens. My role is basically to open boardroom doors to ensure people are not afraid to talk about and care for their mental wellness. And I must say, since COVID, I always say that the boardroom doors across corporate Canada are wide open and they're not shutting. COVID has clearly exponentially moved mental health initiatives at a lightning speed. We all have a role to play in making sure that our mental health toolbox is fully equipped. In order to allow you to put new tools in your mental health toolbox, I have the privilege today of introducing our panels. First, I'll start with Carl Loco. Carl Loco is the owner of Oasis Counseling and Consulting Services based in London, Ontario. He was educated at the University of Ghana, Wilfrid Laurier, and Florida State. Since 1995, Carl has been working as a clinical social worker with a range of adult clients, including individuals who have lived with acquired brain injury, chronic pain, PTSD, anxiety, depression, hopefulness, and the list goes on. Carl is skilled in the areas of trauma-informed counseling and psychotherapy. He is a practicing clinical hypnotherapist who assists in habits and addictions management. Carl has been a field supervisor and trainer for social work, law, medical, art therapy students, and rehab therapists. A focus on mental health, family health, and community building are key areas of concern for Carl. Then we have Alison Demui, is Director of Strategy and Community Engagement at the Canadian Mental Health Association, Waterloo, Wellington. In her role, Alison works to improve the quality and experience of care, raises awareness, and reduces the stigma of mental health, and works to create meaningful partnerships in the goal of building mentally healthy communities. Previous to her role as CMHA, Alison was Senior Manager of Health System Transformation at the Waterloo Wellington Local Health Integration Network. Before entering the world of local healthcare, Allison was a founding partner at Overlap Associates, a design thinking firm in the Waterloo region. There, Allison worked with clients in technology, municipalities, healthcare, and other industries who have challenges with creativity and innovation. With a background in public policy, public affairs, marketing, and communication, Allison works with teams to overcome obstacles and realize a shared vision. Allison has a BA Honors and a Bachelor of Education from U of O and an MA in History from Western University. And then as moderator today, we have Danny Bazzelli. Danny is the Director of Marketing at DriveSeat. She is a certified diversity leader and is extremely passionate about creating inclusive spaces and supporting diversity education. She is a member of the 2SLGBTQ+ community and built a not-for-profit that helps educate organizations on how to be allied businesses and support minority communities and communicate that allyship to the community at large. She is currently getting her chartered marketer designation and holds a position on the GKWCC Chamber Youth Professional Community and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Please join me in welcoming Carl, Allison, and Danny.
Thank you, Denny. Appreciate all of those really, really important accolades. I'm going to now open it up with some questions here, and we'll start off with an open question for Allison and Carl. What are the effects of the pandemic on people's mental and physical health?
Do you want to go ahead, Carl, or do you want me to jump in?
You go first, ladies first.
Well, I think that one's kind of the easiest question we'll have today, because I bet you most people watching this can already talk about what their experience has been on their mental and physical health. But I actually do have some data that'll help support that. I mean, I think we're at this interesting stage now too. When we first were in the pandemic, there was a lot of adrenaline, and I think there was this interest in just getting things done and pivoting and changing and moving and working together. And we're 23 months, almost 24 months in now. So I think things have changed. That pace at the beginning is not sustainable. It's relentless, right? And so people are now feeling the exhaustion of that. You can't run a marathon when you think that you're running a 5K race. So we're in that point of now really deeply feeling the exhaustion, the tiredness of this. Especially leaders in companies are really feeling this because it's, that expression, it's lonely at the top. I think that is the case. They've been feeling the pressure to sort of be the one that had it all together, and that, galvanizing and getting everybody championing about changing and shifting and moving. And they're really feeling exhausted now as well. But let me give you some statistics that'll back this up. CMHA Ontario came out with a recent poll this past week, and they've been doing this all the way through the pandemic. And this latest poll showed that 48%, so nearly half, of Ontarians are saying that their mental health has worsened. And that's up from 36% at the start of the pandemic. 32% of Ontarians are reporting high levels of stress and anxiety. 15% are saying that they're almost always or very often depressed, and that's up slightly from the beginning of the pandemic as well. This is particularly true, and I think folks maybe listening to this would feel this if they have children, because more than 60% of parents say dealing with the pandemic has been difficult on their children, and over 80% believe that not being able to do regular activities outside of home and not seeing friends has had a negative effect on the mental health of their family and on their children. And we also should note that although we're talking about mental health today, substance use and addiction is something that we're also seeing, with almost a quarter of Ontarians reporting that they are consuming more substances roughly than this time last year. So all of those are data points that really demonstrate that, yes, we're not coping well. Although, you know, there's still hope and there's still ways that we can, and that's something that we will talk about a little bit about today. But overall, I would say that people are not faring well based on the pandemic.
Okay. What I have found from speaking to individuals and families is they would say this pandemic has affected so many things. I don't even know how to explain it. So I think that as a clinician, and also as for people who own their own businesses, one of the first things we will try to do is listen, but also support people to have a framework to be able to point at specific things that are part of what's causing them distress. So we know that one of the most pervasive issues for people is high anxiety. People also feel overworked. They feel that they are overworked because a lot of workspaces have people who are not well, so can't come to work. So the few who are there have to do more. A lot of people feel that they've had changes to their lifestyle. And I usually joke with my friends and say, if you live in Canada, you will know that you don't.
Oh,
I think I might have lost you there for a second, Carl. We'll come back to you, Carl, because we're currently disconnected. If you can
Go
hear
on holidays, they come visit people, they come visit parents and grandparents in long-term care facilities. So there is also a pervasive feeling of boredom. There is nothing to do, and it's not just for teenagers and young people. There are adults who feel that their day is not structured the way that it's normally been. They go to work, they come home, do things, visit with friends, and there's disruption to all these areas. So, and then we know that when people are bored and don't feel like they have something to do, then they have lots of time to do things that could be self-destructive. If they are not being deliberate with themselves, they can use illicit drugs and also alcohol to numb the pain that they are experiencing. And I think the pandemic, one of its effects is that it's pushed many people over the edge. So everybody has things that they are carrying on their backs, but the pandemic has added an extra load, making things unbearable. And then I also think that one of the big factors to think about is just people feeling paranoid. They think, what is next? There's a lot of disinformation out there. There's all kinds of information out there, and people have to be mindful of what they are listening to and focusing on. So those are some of the effects that you see on people. There are people who are experiencing what we call alexithymia, which is that they don't even have words to talk about what it is that's bothering them. They say, I feel, which is different from anhedonia. I don't even know what to say. I have no words. So usually when people have no words to say what's bothering them, they can express how they feel inward by engaging in self-destructive behaviors, or they can externalize it. So you see a lot of anger, a lot of agitation, irritation, and people just losing it for what we would think are petty reasons. So these are some of what you see, and I think when things are not going well in individual couples or community lives, you will see them at the workplace, in workspaces. And these are issues that are concerns for employees as well as employers and communities.
Mm-hmm. Allison, how are you seeing it show up in the workplace right now?
Yeah, well, the reality is we spend about 60% of our time working, and that's an average. So the majority of our time is spent in the workplace, and we'll need to redefine the workplace word now because a lot of us, actually almost 50% of us at some point during the pandemic worked outside of our traditional work space. So whether that be at home or in some sort of an isolated space or away from others. And so the workplace has changed completely. And with that change, obviously, people are demonstrating the stress and the burnout that we're all experiencing because of the pandemic in the workplace. Or because of the workplace. And that's something to consider as well. And how that's showing up is really, we're watching people lose their jobs, leaving their jobs willingly. So there's a lot of attrition from workplaces. A lot of people took early retirement and have no plans on coming back. But we're watching that juggling of home life balance. And we're seeing that in a lot of ways. So if you've got young kids, you've definitely experienced how difficult it is to deal with young people while you're working from home. Conversely, those of us who perhaps are just working from home, we don't really necessarily know when our day begins and ends. So there's a lot more stress by not having those barriers of when the workday becomes. People are still nervous though. We're in a physical health pandemic, and so people are still nervous about getting sick in the workplace from home, and so that creates anxiety. And then, there's just the isolation and physical distancing that can really take a toll on people's mental health. Not having that connectivity, not having a water cooler to go to, not having social events to go to at work, because again, that's where we're spending the majority of our time. People are really feeling the loneliness of that. So it's experiencing itself in lack of productivity, and burnout and stress levels. People's ability to handle things just isn't the same as it used to be 2 years ago.
And what do you think that organizations could do to help overcome some of that in the workplace?
Yeah, well, again, I think the reality is the mental health needs of our community is not just a healthcare concern. So it requires a whole of community answer to this. So as much as, the Canadian Mental Health Association and Carl are here to provide support if you need to, the reality is workplaces need to step up and really pay attention to what workplace mental health looks like for them. There is a standard. It existed pre-pandemic. It's phenomenal. It's put out by the Mental Health Commission of Canada. And it's a standard for what is considered a psychologically safe place to work. And it includes everything from the types of programs that you deliver, the types of supports that employees have access to, all the way through to, are actually you involving people in the influence of decisions? Are you creating an autonomous workplace? Is there balance? Is there engagement? All of those things contribute to a healthy place to work. But essentially, I think it's a place in which employers need to think about the mental health just as much as they think of the physical safety of their employees. Danny, I'll let you know there's one statistic. I know I'm talking about a lot of statistics today, but there's one that I really like, and that is the Mental Health Commission of Canada put out an economic study about 10 years ago, and now it applies even more. And that shows that for every dollar that an organization spends on the mental health of their employees, they get that back as a 4 times the amount of return on investment. So spending money or putting effort really into what is workplace mental health pays off in the end. And it doesn't have to be a really big deal. It can just be about opening up the discussion, talking about it. And that starts at the leadership level. It really is important for those at the head of companies, even small businesses, to say, I acknowledge that mental health matters. It's important. We reduce stigma, make it a free place to talk about that, and then start building towards having, all the ingredients for a really psychologically safe place to work.
Thank you. And Carl, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, my thoughts on it are that mental health obviously is an important area for employees as well as employers. And because of that, tackling it has to have a focus from policy level. It has to have a focus on individual level. It has to have a focus on how to create opportunity for workers to access support for this. So, for instance, if an employer is seeing a lot of absenteeism, they are seeing that people are quote unquote cranky in the workplace, and all they do is say, well, we have EAP, you can go to EAP. That is not enough. There have to be a safe and confidential way for people to feel okay to speak to their supervisors, for instance, or to just be able to access those resources if the company has set aside funds for that. And I really believe in the idea that we shouldn't wait until employers or employees are beset with mental health problems. We should manage the antecedents to that. So I think Alison touched on antecedent management a little bit when she was saying, how do we create safe spaces? How do we create opportunities for people to talk with each other, even from a distance? Because I think you can generate practical, positive topics, such as, what was your favorite thing that you saw in the Winter Olympics today? Or what was your favorite food that you saw? What was your favorite natural place that you visited? These are they are not intrusive, but they are all topics that talk about harmonious things. And the more positive, from the world of hypnotherapy, the more you imbue somebody with positivity, the better their mood state will be. So we need to create policies, we need to create structures, we need to create procedures, and we need to support people to access mental health workers, whether it's social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, peer mentorship program. But we can be creative. I think that one of the positive things this pandemic has done is that it has contributed to people finding really innovative ways to pump themselves up, to peck themselves up. I've seen people cooking meals in their homes and eating them together virtually, but they share the recipes and they joke about it. And it's different from meeting in person, but it's better than no communication.
And Carl, are you seeing, with a lot more dialogue on mental health and it becoming, the increasing number of problems, are we seeing a change in the stigmatization and the dialogue about mental health? If we're seeing changes, how is that helping people combat? If there is still stigma, what should we be doing to help make it better? I know that was a broad three-pronged question, but I definitely am curious, because as we talk about it, there being increases, how that is affecting the stigma.
Well, I'll tell you something. When I have a client who comes in, usually for my female clients, I think women are a little bit ahead of men with being able to talk about things that bother them emotionally. But a lot of the guys will come and say, Carl, you know, oh, I hate crying. I've been crying, and I would say, that is good. And they would say, well, what do you mean? And I would say, well, that means you are not a stone. That means you're a person. You can feel things, you can experience things. And if you can cry, that's a good thing. So we need to normalize the expression of how we feel, and for people not to feel shame about that. And I think one of the good ways to do that is by doing something like this presentation, or people post, there are lots of posts from CMHA that tell people about various mood states that people are experiencing, psychological mood states, as well as present pointers on links to go to, so that you can find help. I think personally, I'm seeing more open dialogue about mental health, and in part because of the wave of addictions we are experiencing, but we are also seeing a lot of mental health related promise in the society. Suicide rates have increased, people harming themselves has increased. So we are talking more about it, and we are talking more about signs to look for, to recognize, and what types of support to provide. So I do think there is more open dialogue on it. And if employers, and again, employers shouldn't simply put funds towards an EAP, and then as soon as you have an issue, the HR person say, well, we have EAP, go to it. I think that is not sufficient. I think it is good to have a webinar like this. It is good to have a brown bag in the employment space or virtually to talk about mental health issues, so that people who don't feel emboldened to talk openly would at least know that they are not alone. And so if they feel they are not alone, when they are seeking help, it's a little bit easier.
How about you, Allison?
I was just going to add to that. Is that okay, Danny? Because I think the one thing that is perhaps, well, it's maybe not the one thing, but a thing that's positive from the pandemic is that when I started working in mental health care over a decade ago, you know, there still was a pretty high level of stigma, a resistance to talk about it, frankly, shame that either people had about their own mental wellness, or shame in talking about perhaps a family member who might be suffering, and certainly not in the workplace at all. And I think the pandemic has reduced that barrier, because I think at some point in the last 24 months, every single person has had a moment, if not several moments, if not several days or weeks or months, but certainly a moment in which you've experienced that real low. And you've probably experienced the difficulty in coming out of that low. And so that gives people a sense of empathy now that maybe they didn't have before, with what it is to find yourself in a place where you're feeling low, you're feeling anxious, you're not sure what to do, and you don't really know where to turn to. And so those are all the experiences of those that are dealing with mental health issues. And now there's a greater sense of awareness of that. I mean, I think just by virtue of the fact that we're watching this with our young people and our kids and students in our lives, you know, we're really watching the effects on them. There's a more openness to make sure that we are, just like Carl said, backing up the bus and being more preventative in some of the things that we can do to stay mentally healthy, so that it doesn't get worse. And, you know, I mean, that's an important thing about mental health that we probably need to make clear, is that although there are some tragic circumstances and some tragic outcomes, and people can feel, you know, really in a place where they're not feeling the hope, that's not typical. Typically, their recovery is possible. Typically, there's help that's available. typically there's things that you can do to sort of, again, maintain that health and not feel like you're going to get to a place that's quite tragic. And so, really that's a whole community approach. I always say that this is kind of a team sport. It's a team sport as a community, and it certainly is in the workplace. Getting back to our workplace focus today, if everybody in a company really understands and builds a culture that is destigmatizing of mental health, it raises the game for everybody, and it really does a lot to actually promote positive mental health in your workplace.
I would add that, and this is just from my own personal belief, that we need to pay particular attention to people who have grandparents or elderly parents in long-term care facilities, because whenever there's an outbreak, whenever there's a contact, they can't visit them for 10 or 14 days. And I think it's very, very difficult for people. I've had a number of clients who have been extremely distraught because their parents, they can't visit their parents or their grandparents. And of course, it weighs on them, and it weighs on everything else that they are doing. So I know we are not supposed to be nosy with people, what's going on with them. But if you're a supervisor and you have an employee that has elderly parents and they ask that they be allowed some time to work around issues regarding them, it's a big mental health concern, and we should take that very, very seriously.
Allison, what are some signs and symptoms that we should be looking for ourselves and in others to recognize when someone's potentially dealing with mental illness?
Yeah, that's a question that we often get, and it's kind of interesting because I think, I think a lot of people are waiting that mental health requires a diagnosis or, some sort of a label. And the reality is mental health is more than just the absence of a mental health condition or a mental illness. It is the sense of positive well-being. It's the capacity to enjoy life, and to enjoy life even while we're dealing with challenges that we might face. And that's where, again, I think that a lot of people have some empathy for that, where they found it difficult to sort of get through situations that are normal in their lives and feel joy when we were, we're in these high stress conditions that we've been living under in the last 2 years. But people living with a mental health issue or a condition can experience positive mental health. And just conversely, people who may experience poor mental health don't necessarily have to have a labeled condition. So all this to say, really what you're looking for when you're looking at your own mental health or the mental health of others is the ability to enjoy life, or really what you're looking for is not having that capacity to find joy in life. And I always say it's based on sort of the intensity of that and perhaps the duration. We all are going to have bad days. What you're looking for is when you're having those really tough days intensively, you can't get out of bed, it's affecting your eating, your sleeping, or it's a long duration. So you're experiencing that real blues for longer than a few weeks, or more than just a few days. It's really looking for that. So look for those abilities to deal with daily tasks. Again, if it's affecting your eating, you're eating more, you're eating less, you're sleeping more, you're sleeping less, you're not really experiencing joy or finding those moments of joy. And also watch for it in physical symptoms as well, because a lot of us don't necessarily notice our mental health until we're experiencing it in a physical way. So tension or effects on other chronic diseases like heart disease and other stress levels that are effects of stress levels on our physical health. So if you're watching for those in yourself and others, that's really important. And like Carl said, this is kind of one of those times where we are, it sounds cliche, but we are all in this together. We are all going through this together. it's important for us, just like we watch out for each other's physical health during this pandemic, it's important for us to keep an eye on folks, especially folks that are vulnerable. So those that don't have the supports around them, our elderly, parents, friends, neighbors, especially neighbors if they're living alone, especially in the wintertime. Kids, teenagers especially, don't necessarily have the ability to verbalize what's going on with them. It's good to check in. One thing I've always said is never feel, you're never going to plant the idea of mental health if you ask about it with somebody. Oftentimes, if you say, how are you doing? Like, how are you really doing? People actually will welcome that and maybe find that as an opportunity to share how they're doing. And then you don't have to worry too much about necessarily solving it for them. That's not actually what your job is. It's maybe just to listen and to hold space and to be an ear, because even just acknowledging it, talking through it, and holding space is a big part of working through what might be an experienced mental health issue.
Anything to add there, Carl?
Yeah, I think that in our homes and workspaces, you just look at what is interfering with a person's functioning, adaptive functioning. So if you want to create a framework for looking at that, you can look at what are behaviors you are seeing that interfere with someone's adaptive functioning. What are their thought processes? Are they scattered? Are they being negative? Are they talking about hopeless stuff all the time? Are they, pessimistic? Then you look at emotional markers. Are you feeling like you are crying when you don't know why? Are you feeling no joy, like Alison pointed out? You can look at that. And you can also look at what people are thinking about cognitively. What are they thinking about? Usually when people are very, very anxious, I would say anxiety is a function of perceived threat compared to a person's idea of whether they can manage that threat or not. So if we feel we can manage that perceived threat, we are going to feel very, very anxious. So when you support somebody to, I call it compartmentalize, you tell the person, these are all important, but they are not equally important, and they are not equally pressing. And they itemize those things, they will soon see that they don't have to feel so overwhelmed with those. Some things can be referred, some things can wait, some can be dealt with now, some may never be solved, but they won't harm anything. And suddenly people feel better. So I usually look at things from these 4 dimensions, emotional, cognitive, behavioral, and you also look at some psychological things going on with the person. So yeah, those will be in your workspace. Watch for absenteeism. Watch for people saying, I have headache all the time. My blood pressure is going high. I feel irritable. I'm angry all the time. I can't stand working with just about anyone in the organization. There has to be somebody you can work with. If all of these are not going well, then you know that the person is not functioning properly, and they need to access support.
Thank you. Carl, we constantly hear the importance of work-life balance. What measures can an organization put in place to achieve this?
Okay, I think that there are many things we can do to ensure workplace balance, work and home life balance. So I think that in this pandemic period, it is very, very important. Alison referenced people who have young children. which is it's a whole area, but you need to balance the time you spend with you and your friends and your spouse and your kids and co-workers. So workplaces can be flexible. They can choose not to insist on workers coming in person to their workspace all the time. But they can also say, well, come to work, maybe come to the workspace twice a week so that you can get away from home if you are able to arrange babysitter. If you can't and you can get your job done, you know, as long as you get your job done, I don't have a problem with it. I really don't. I say it's not how busy you are cutting grass that is important. It's how efficiently you do it and how quickly. If it's done fine, then you are okay to go. So be flexible with workspaces, be flexible with work schedules. Also, sometimes we can hire more people to do parts of a job so that we don't burn our good employees out. Because I know that what a lot of naive, inexperienced managers do is that when they have very good workers, they load them with all the hard stuff. You know, they will say, Danny is such a smart lady, I'll just, every heavy load, I'll give it to her, she's going to do it. But Danny is a human being, she has one heart and she's going to get tired. So we have to be conscious about spreading the load, knowing that we live in times that are very, very stressful. We can also create policies in our workspaces, policies around harassment, make sure that nobody feels harassed, because we don't want to add more things to an already difficult condition. So there are spaces, there are very clear procedures for dealing with harassment. And sometimes if you have to get external agents to come and help, then that's fine. You get a consultant to come and look at your organization and provide pointers for creating a more healthy space. I think that workers can deliberately, I know now there are no volleyball leagues and soccer leagues and what do you call this game? Pool leagues and so on, because we can't go out. But you can have other types of leagues. You can have Scrabble leagues, you can have cooking leagues, but the workspace has to focus on that and reward those that come up with brilliant ideas for doing that. I believe in rewarding positive behaviors. So if some workers can come up with creative things like that, that's going to be very good. So we can create positive workspaces using policies. We can create positive workspaces by presenting opportunities for people to seek support, and management has to be behind it. Managers, management directors, senior personnel have to be in it fully. And I think that if anybody says my child is not well, or my wife isn't well, or husband isn't well, we need to take it very, very seriously. And there are people who can't say I have COVID, because COVID carries a stigma in the minds of some people. They will say, if they know I have COVID, nobody wants to come near me. Nobody wants to do anything with me. Or they know someone in my family has COVID, then people think if I go near Carl, I might get sick. So we need to be conscious of those things and create opportunities to discuss that. I think another important issue, and this may or may not generate controversy here, but I have clients who talk a lot about whether they will follow public policy instructions from or suggestions from the health unit. I tell all my clients that I trust in the work that the public health does, from managing water and making sure it's not contaminated when we drink it, all the way to immunization. So I follow what they tell me. I leave it at that. I don't get into debates about conspiracy theories and who is doing this or that. I say I just follow what the public suggests we do. And when my clients come to my office, I follow the protocol that's coming from the public health unit. But that can become a source of stress and conflict in the workplace if you have people that think that they don't have to follow any instructions from public health entities.
Can I add on to that, Danny? Is that okay? I think that's really important, and I think what Carl said around the balance and the role that companies play can be pretty daunting. So I know our audience is mostly chamber members, and I think it's important to say, I think if you've been in the HR field this past couple of years, this has been a lot on you from rolling out public health protocols like Carl talked about, all the way through to now worrying about what people are really calling the mental health issues, sort of the echo pandemic, and now feeling the burden of having to deal with the mental health of your workforce. I get it. This is really hard. This is important to say that this should not fall just on HR, human resources. This is a whole of community problem, and it's a whole of community solution. You've also got a couple of really great resources, and at the end of this, we're going to send out information about programs and services and workshops and things that we do, especially at CMHA and otherwise, will that can help you understand what options are. So you don't necessarily have to feel the burden of it, or that you have to kind of invent these programs. They exist out there, and it's everything from, again, that employee assistance program where people can access care that they need when they need it, all the way through to ideas around, like having fun things to do virtually and safely that, again, create that community space. So I just don't want people to feel that they're alone in this. We're here with you.
I actually wanted to add something as well. I took an inclusive leadership course, and that was a huge portion of it was regarding flexibility and dialogue. And there's obviously, it can create some discrimination in the workforce if you have parents who have children who are navigating really complicated times right now, or people who are taking care of their elderly in their households. We obviously know there's lots of people in the sandwich generation probably on this call who are caring for multiple generations, and just coming at it from a position of empathy always, and understanding that yes, we're here on this call because we don't have all the answers or all the resources, but we need to move forward knowing that we don't always know what's going on at home. And yes, we've got to see into people's homes more than ever in the last 2 years, but that doesn't necessarily mean we understand what they're going through or what they need. And there needs to, if you have an environment that doesn't allow for that type of dialogue, or that creates a stigma where people feel that if they need to leave to go care for their ill child, or something's happening that they're going to feel penalized, it's going to create a lot of anxiety, then probably more than already exists in what is a stressful time. So just a position of empathy I wanted to just add there as well. We are coming kind of closer to our end here. So I know, Allison, you just mentioned there's going to be resources that will be sent out for everyone. Obviously, we all recommend that you do look into these, look how you can apply them, look at your leaderships. How can you help educate them to better support? Of course, as well, making sure your leadership are supported as well. They're not in it alone. And then I want to pass it back to, is there any final thoughts from Allison or Carl before I pass it back to Denise?
Again, I think just, happy to share resources, CMHA is a great resource. There's lots of resources out there. If you are, though, experiencing a mental health crisis, or somebody who is, please reach out. So locally here in the Waterloo, Wellington area, we have a great resource. It's a 1-800 number. It's 1-844-HERE247. It's 24/7, and it's a trained mental health clinician that's on the line all the time. So if any time you're even just having questions or not sure, but certainly if you're in crisis or you know somebody who is, please call. Don't do this alone. We're here with you. And I'm sure Carl has something brilliant to add to that as well.
Yeah, I had, thank you, Alison. I'd made up some slides on noticing stress signs and some strategies for managing them. So after the presentation, I'll forward it. Should I forward it to Gina or to Saba? I'll send it to one of you, and you can share it with the participants. I just want to say that I am very grateful to be part of this talk that we are having, and I'm really glad that the chamber in your area is very, very concerned about mental health of employers and employees. And I think this is something that's very worthy and should continue.
To you, Denis.
Thank you. You know, what a session. So much knowledge there. It can be overwhelming to some of our participants, I'm sure. But I think I want to emphasize 2 points. This is not an HR issue. That got made clear by Alison and Carl. We all have a role to play. So I think individually, as listeners, as individuals and corporations, we owe it to ourselves to equip our own mental health toolbox by learning about some of the great tools that Alison and Carl are going to share with us, because HR can't do it alone. And there's so many free things out there that I think, Danny, if any organization, regardless of size, invest a little bit of time, you know, and we've got places like jack.org for youth mental health, Movember with the ALEC tool for men's mental health, the Bounce Back program, which is free in Ontario, Mind Beacon, e-therapy apps, and the list goes on and on and on. So despite your budget, I think if somebody from the organization just searches mental health, they're going to hit CAMH, they're going to hit the Royal Ottawa and share these tools with their team, that can go a long ways. And share it in a low, don't make this a mental health parade that, oh, it's Bell, let's talk, let's have the parade and not talk about this for another 12 months. Put this on your agenda in every meeting. Who are running too hot? Right? So imagine in your meeting this afternoon, Danny, if you say, hey, I learned about Bounce Back today, just wanted to share it with everyone, right? You're not mental health, you're just sharing tools. So I think together, if we all own this, we can really move the dial.
Fantastic.
All right. Thanks so much, Denis. That's wise words. And I'm always struck, mental health is, in one way you look at this, there's a cost to business for mental health, but it has a unique situation of being, it's the right thing to do, to be investing time and money and resources and putting the time into these conversations, because it's the right thing to do, and it has the benefit of being good for business. So this has been an amazing session. I want to thank Carl and Alison and Danny for joining us today. Denis, for your support through KPMG of this as well. But that does bring us to the end of today's session. I want to thank again our title sponsor of the series, Manulife, our platinum sponsor for the series, the Immigration Partnership of Waterloo Region, and February sponsor, KPMG. And finally, to all of you for joining us today. As a reminder, we do host a new Business Success Series session every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Join us next week for What Can We Learn from the Land? Stewardship and Monitoring Efforts and Opportunities at RARE Waterloo Region. Jenna Quinn is program scientist at RARE, and she joins us as our guest. We hope to see you then. To register, please do visit the events page at the greaterkwchamber.com website. Please share this series with your friends and colleagues. Join us again every Wednesday afternoon for the next Business Success Series.